What's up everyone, welcome back to Travel Dash. This is the start of a 3-day long road trip through the White Mountains of New Hampshire, one of the most incredible spots in America for fall foliage. This is supposed to be peak season. We're here in early October. It's gonna be sweet.
At this point, it may as well be an annual tradition that I take a fall foliage trip to New England, because from what I've seen, it is just one of the top places to be if you want to see those vibrant yellows, oranges, and reds. 2023 was probably the most vibrant display I've seen, that being in the Berkshire Mountains of Massachusetts and Vermont, but shout out to 2024's trip to Acadia National Park. That too was great. This year, I'd heard that fall colors in New England were less impressive than usual due to an intense drought in the summer, but despite that, I went ahead and planned a 3-day trip to what has always been my #1 bucket list destination to visit during this season. The White Mountains are a sub-range of the Greater Appalachian Mountains spanning Alabama to Maine, and is known for containing some of the highest peaks in the Northeast, including the highest Mount Washington, which we'll talk about later. The area is protected as the White Mountain National Forest, nearly 800,000 acres of outstanding natural beauty and scenic drives. Technically, it wasn't my first time in the White Mountains, as I passed through it during a theme park-focused road trip in 2024. Here, you'll find Storyland and Santa's Village, two wonderful family destinations that I have a vlog for over on my other YouTube channel, Coaster Dash. I'll leave a link to that video in the description for those curious, as many tourists plan a visit to one or both of those parks with the outdoorsy stuff I'll highlight today to create a White Mountains vacation of sorts. One more thing before we get started with our itinerary is we originally scheduled this trip for Columbus Day weekend, which is normally peak season for fall foliage. But as it came closer and closer, we began seeing reports that the best color was nearly 2 weeks early in 2025 as a result of the aforementioned drought. So we ended up moving our trip to the very beginning of October, and I kid you not, by the first of the month when we kicked things off, many were saying the White Mountains were already past peak, which I struggled to even comprehend. So take that as you will, but as someone from Southern California who isn't exactly used to fall foliage, I will more than take what we got, plus there will always be future opportunities. In any case, we dedicate day 1 to the western part of the National Forest, more specifically Franconia Notch State Park, which is absolutely loaded with cool stuff. Now, the word notch will come up numerous times in this video, so for those of you unsure of what that means, it's basically a large V-shaped cut or hole between mountains. It's really not so different from a canyon, but many of the notches in these mountains have major roads and highways going through them, which makes getting from point A to point B a lot more efficient. Heading north to south, we begin at the Cannon Mountain Aerial Tramway, which is this huge gondola ride that takes you up to the top of Cannon Mountain, formerly Profile Mountain. You may have heard of this peak before, as it was once home to the Old Man of the Mountain until the iconic formation collapsed in 2003. It's pretty much synonymous with New Hampshire, its image being used on state license plates and road signs to this day. For a ride aboard the aerial tramway, you'll want to book a dated ticket online as they do sell out in advance, particularly in the fall, which is the area's busy season. It costs $28 per person for about an hour-long experience, and the gondola departs once every 15 minutes. The journey up was absolutely spectacular, lasting around 10 minutes, and it just got more dramatic the higher we went. It seemed like there was an explosion of color on the foothill where the tramway was built, mainly yellows, but you've also got your oranges and reds out in the distance as well. Echo Lake is also worth mentioning on the left-hand side. That was an absolutely beautiful compliment to the scene, and this won't be the last time it's brought up. Far from it. Lastly, I have to make note of the exposed rock jetting out of the side of distant mountains. That's a key characteristic of much of the White Mountains. Upon our arrival to the summit station, the guide aboard the gondola recommended to everyone the short trail to the observation platform, which was located at the true summit of Cannon Mountain. So we made sure to do that, and it's a nice and easy walk to get there with a good mix of alpine forest with lots of moss and openings in the trees where you can look out as far as the eye can see. I especially loved overlooking the inside of the notch with all that yellow making the valley appear to glow. Cannon Mountain stands at a height of 4,080 feet high, and it's the tallest ski area summit in New Hampshire, offering a variety of terrain for skiers and snowboarders. Two fascinating details I acknowledged from the top was first how you have all the evergreen trees in the higher elevations of the Whites, which retain their leaves all year round and don't change color. That made for a striking contrast to the yellows and oranges in the lower elevations, allowing those trees to really pop. 2, this was our best view on the trip looking out at the Franconia Range, which is a sub-range of the White Mountains, so a sub-range of a sub-range if you will. Up on top of those peaks, consisting of Little Haystack Mountain, Mount Lincoln, and Mount Lafayette, is a huge bucket list hike called the Franconia Ridge Trail. I decided to prioritize a larger concentration of spots this trip, as the nearly 10-mile journey would have taken up an entire day, but it's something to look forward to when I inevitably return. We took in the views a little longer and then made our way back to the tramway station, concluding our epic experience at Cannon Mountain.
Cannon Mountain is definitely quite spectacular. I love those panoramic views all around you. The fall colors, they're a little bit muted this year, but they're still absolutely gorgeous from up top especially, so I love it. I think it's great. Cannon Mountain, definitely check it out.
Just up the road, maybe 2 miles away, is New Hampshire's single most popular hike, as it's been heavily featured in social media posts, often in the fall as this specific part of the Whites get really good color. called Artist Bluff. I know there's a lot of people who hate how geotagged spots like this have gotten, and I can 100% empathize with that frustration, especially if you're local to the area, but there's no denying that I likely wouldn't know about it if not for the excessive posting. It's a shame about the overcrowding, don't get me wrong, but just do your part and keep the place clean and in good condition. Much to my surprise, it actually wasn't as packed as I'd heard, but a lot of that probably has to do with the fact that we went on a Thursday, and that was meticulous. A lot of people hike this as a loop, which is about 1.5 miles, but you can cut this down to as little as 0.6 miles if you go straight out to the overlook and back the same way. It is a lot steeper and a fair bit more strenuous if you do it this way, but to maximize our time in the area, that's what we decided to do. In a single 0.2 mile stretch, you'll navigate 200 feet of elevation gain along roots and rocks. It is not fun, but it did get us up to Artist Bluff a lot faster, and it was totally worth the effort. The lookout takes place on a rock outcropping and provides expansive vistas of Echo Lake down below, Cannon Mountain to the right, the Franconia Mountains on the left, and of course the Franconia Notch Valley, which was dazzling with every color I could have dreamt of seeing. That includes some reds, which were few and far between this year, but really added to this particular view. It's easy to understand why they called this Artist Bluff because it genuinely feels like you're in an art piece of some kind. It's one of those picture-perfect spots, something you might see on postcards. Seriously, just as incredible of a place as I hoped it would be.
I've wanted to see Artist Bluff for as long as I can remember. This is such an iconic spot here in New Hampshire. I've seen it on Instagram for years. And a lot of people, they oversaturate those fall colors, make it look unrealistic. But I feel like these are the most vibrant colors we have seen so far. Granted, we've just gotten started, but oh my gosh, it is every bit as beautiful as I hoped it would be. It's amazing.
Shout out to this underrated gem up next. If you make your way to the adjacent parking lot from the trailhead to Artist Bluff, you'll wind up at Echo Lake Beach. There is a small fee you have to pay, which is a shame since Artist Bluff is free for everyone, but nonetheless, I love these perspectives so much. It allows you to fully appreciate Echo Lake in all of its glory, and in many ways, being on the beach just felt like another version of Artist Bluff. Virtually just as beautiful with a fraction of the people, so I would highly recommend you check it out. Probably the most overlooked spot in Franconia Notch State Park.
Please do not miss Echo Lake Beach if you come here. It's almost as good of a view in my opinion as Artist Bluff. It is absolutely gorgeous. The only thing I'm not a fan of, they charge the $4 US for a day use, but of course we're not staying here that long. We just wanted to pop in, see the view and leave, and you don't get a discount if you do that. So you got to pay the $4 either way, but still it is worth it. This is absolutely gorgeous.
On the topic of lakes, another one I planned into our itinerary was Profile Lake since it was right on the way to the stuff further south. On Google Maps, the specific parking lot comes up as trailhead parking for Franconia State Park, as it's actually the start of some hike I'm unfamiliar with. While I think Echo Lake's base views are more beautiful, Profile Lake doesn't fall too far behind with the monolithic rock formation stemming from the mountain backdrop. It's another underrated hidden gem and it's completely free unlike Echo Lake Beach, so why not? Following this, I realized we were ahead of schedule and had to kill some time because we had reservations for Flume Gorge and they don't typically allow early entry, so at the last second, we made the decision to pull off at the Basin, which was recommended to us by our guide on the Cannon Mountain Aerial Tramway. I didn't realize how popular this was, as there was tons of cars parked up to see this, and then once you're done, I believe you can also continue up a mountainside and see a whole bunch of waterfalls too. The Basin section in particular more so consists of a bunch of cascades making its way down a hillside, and there's all these interesting rock formations they flow around. The trail design was cool with all the bridges and rock scrambling you have to do to get different perspectives of the water flow. It was almost a mystery where it would head next. I actually really enjoyed it. And that was before we made it to the actual basin, the namesake of this whole thing, which is a small waterfall with a granite pothole about 20 feet across. It formed as a result of the North American ice sheet and since made smooth by 15 millennia of rapidly whirling pebbles and sand particles. Nothing about it is overly amazing, but it's just a lot of fun and I'm kind of surprised we were going to bypass it considering how unique a spot it is.
I didn't originally have the Basin on my to-do list, but it's a lot cooler than I thought. It's like a ton of different cascades maneuvering around rocks, and the water's just having a fun time going through it.
The furthest south we go in day one, Flume Gorge is one of the White Mountains' most cherished natural landmarks. But it's quite a commitment to see as you first must reserve online in advance as it can get really busy here. Then from there you must trek about a mile up hundreds of feet of elevation gain just to reach the canyon's mouth. It caught me off guard how much effort was required to access Flume Gorge considering how popular it is, and also because I'd compare it in my head to Watkins Glen State Park in New York, which is a similar type thing, except there you simply park up and walk right on in. There's also not much to look at heading out, with the exception of this pleasant covered bridge. These are a staple of New England, and it's not the last one we see on this trip. Flume Gorge, though, is no doubt pretty cool when you get to it, extending 800 feet horizontally at the base of Mount Liberty. Cut by Flume Brook, the gorge features walls of silky smooth granite that rise to a height of up to 90 feet. It's a veritable slot canyon too, with the walls being just 12 feet apart in some instances, which may not seem super tight, but considering you have water gushing through this thing, I don't know, it just feels more crammed in than it may actually be. Speaking of the brook, there's actually two waterfalls you pass by, the first of which isn't named but drops the water directly beneath the walkway, which is exciting. You get some real interesting perspectives of this one for that reason, and by the way, regardless of whether or not there is a waterfall present, remember to look back the way you came every once in a while. You might be surprised by how different the gorge appears. Plus, unlike Watkins Glen, this hike is a mandatory loop, meaning once you emerge from the canyon, you don't pass through it again. So before that, you'll see Avalanche Falls, a 45-foot high cascade flowing over one of the rock walls. It complements the gorge perfectly, and it's a great conclusion to it, but I can't help but admit that I was surprised and maybe even a little disappointed by how short Flume Gorge turned out to be.
Flume Gorge is very cool. It's awesome, the trail design once you get into the canyon. That being said, it is smaller and shorter than I expected, and it takes a decent bit of effort just to get to it. I see this compared to Watkins Glen State Park in New York quite often. I think that is far more impressive, and it requires far less effort to actually reach the base of it, or I guess the mouth. But yeah, still cool. Glad I got to see it, and probably one of the highlights of the White Mountains. You just don't see things like this too often in the East.
Now, to be fair to Flume Gorge, I spoke too soon when recording that review. While my opinion on the canyon itself didn't change as a result of this, I was caught off guard by how much more there was to see on the way back, thinking it was going to be more or less the same as the journey out. In actuality, there were so many fascinating elements, starting with the bear cave, which you have the ability to climb through. Soon after this, you're greeted by an opening in the trees where you have some mountain views, giving the scenery more variety. Then what I failed to realize was that there was going to be a whole other gorge along this trail, called Liberty Gorge. I first found out upon noticing a trail split down to an observation platform overlooking Liberty Cascade. The waterfall marks the start of the canyon, and though it had weak flow at the time of our visit, it was relatively large with a total 70-foot height. Travel further along the trail and you'll notice these spurs come up more frequently, including one overlooking the pool, which is cool in and of itself, but what really caught me off guard was how big Liberty Gorge was, especially in comparison to Flume Gorge. Right after that, you have to cross another covered bridge, this one granting views of the canyon and distant fall foliage. Being here, I obviously get why Flume Gorge is substantially more famous because, as I stated, it is super unique, but this improved my opinion on the trail in totality by a lot. And the surprises don't end here, it's a gift that keeps on giving. Wolf's Den is a short but super tight slot canyon with an entrance and an exit, just another random but awesome rock feature. And then there's an option to conquer probably about 150 stairs to get to the bottom of Liberty Gorge. From an observation platform, you get this astoundingly picturesque look at a small waterfall make its way down into the pool, beneath the bridge you've just crossed. It was pure eye candy, definitely make sure to do this. After one more additional mountain viewpoint, the Flume Trail comes to a close and I felt like I owed it an apology of sorts. Not that I ever disliked it or anything, I just expected a little bit more out of it, not realizing there was a whole second half I'd overlooked. Concluding our time here, we did make sure to check out the visitor center because it was absolutely huge, plus there were some nice mountain vistas directly outside with pretty good fall color. To put a bow on our spectacular first day in the White Mountains, I did want to shout out this restaurant we went to. We ended up having some great food on this trip, like one of the most memorable examples was the Sugar Shack, and you see these everywhere up and down New England, but grabbing ourselves some fall treats never gets old. If you head up this way, please do yourself a favor and try an authentic apple cider donut and maple ice cream, which out here is referred to as a maple creamy. They're honestly so incredible. But before I went on that tangent, I was gonna say we swung by this restaurant out in the middle of nowhere with hardly any reviews. It was called Booze Burgers. It was situated inside this inn resort type place, but I wanted to mention it not because the food was good, which it was, but rather the views from this place were mesmerizing. You can actually take a short walk to an observation deck for an unobstructed look, but man, it was almost surreal seeing all these mountains in front of us. Especially since they were the same ones we'd been in all day, it just felt like such a fitting, almost perfect end. Now I couldn't wait for the morning of day 2 because personally this was my most anticipated spot on the trip. Mount Washington isn't just New England's highest point, but we can go beyond that, as it's also the highest point in the Northeast at 6,288 feet. It's also the most topographically prominent mountain east of the Mississippi River. There's 3 ways to access its summit. You can hike almost 10 miles, you can drive up the Mount Washington Auto Road, or do what I think is most interesting, take a cog railway up to the top. This conveniently was located on the side of the mountain closest to where we were staying. I think the auto road would have been something like an hour away, and that's not even factoring in the journey to actually reach the summit. So that was also a contributing factor as to why we chose the railway. The only thing I'm not a fan of is that $100 a person price tag. And what's more, you'll have to reserve this farther in advance than anything else in this video. The cog railway is stupid popular in the fall. But what's annoying about that is changing your date or canceling becomes extremely difficult in the instance of poor visibility up top. Mount Washington is notorious for its summit being in the clouds more than 60% of the time of the year, which is crazy, and it's not like we'd be going in the summer where the likelihood of sunshine is higher. Fortunately, we lucked out and had phenomenal weather for the entire trip, so this wasn't something we had to worry about, but I feel for all those other people who have spent heaps of money for their whole family to take the railway, only to get no view out of it at all. On the bright side, the journey up is a big part of the fun, taking about 50 minutes each way. Then you've got an hour up at the summit, so plan for a 3-hour experience, give or take. Now, a question you might be wondering is where to sit. Well, you've got 3 separate cars on this thing, and the front sells out way before most of the other seats, but I wouldn't have picked the front even if I were given the chance. I was actually glad to be put in the back. And the reason I say that is because heading up, you are allowed to get up and walk around, but going down, because the grade is so steep, you must stay seated the entire time. The fall foliage was absolutely unbelievable in the first third of the climb. My jaw was on the floor. And then, as we transitioned to the evergreen trees, I was once again able to appreciate the difference in color, just as I did at Cannon Mountain. Then during the final third of the way up, you'll notice the landscape change around you as the trees completely disappear, and instead you're left with bushes and shrubs. And finally, once near the very top, there's nothing but rocks because it gets so cold and so windy, nothing is able to survive. In fact, as I present some of the shots I got from Mount Washington summit, I want to dive deeper into the conditions found up here. It's often said that Mount Washington has the worst weather in the United States, as in the 1930s, the highest wind ever recorded by man was observed at 231 miles per hour. Additionally, as recently as 2023, Mount Washington set the record for coldest temperature in recorded history in the contiguous United States, with a wind chill calculation of negative 108 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm not sure of the specific variables that might cause this, but it sure is crazy. As you can see, the summit viewpoint is otherworldly as you look out at a silhouette of endless hills and mountains. On the other side, you've got some nearly as tall mountains making up the Presidential Range, which is another sub-range of a sub-range situation. Mount Jefferson and Mount Adams are breathtaking, especially since, like Mount Washington, their summits and its surrounding area is exposed and not covered by trees like most of the mountains in the east. The insane prominence and weather is why some of the really tall New England peaks such as these almost appear as though they were picked up from the western United States and plopped down here.
Seeing these summit views from the top of Mount Washington, the highest point in the Northeast, has been on my bucket list for years and years, so this was incredible to check off the list, and it is as stunning as I could have ever imagined it to be. Between the fall colors, the expansive mountain views, I mean, just those layers, oh, it's incredible up here.
For the remainder of day 2, we head into another notch just south of Mount Washington, situated in Crawford Notch State Park. The number one reason you need to come to this specific portion of the White Mountains is because they have a hike here that features one of my favorite overlooks ever in the eastern United States. It's called Mount Willard, and the trailhead to reach its summit is right across the street from Saco or Saco Lake. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it. But that was a pretty cool sight alone, so be sure to scope that out before conquering the hike. Mount Willard ended up being the longest trail of this trip to New Hampshire, although it's still nothing overly crazy at just 3.1 miles round trip. The real difficulty comes from that non-stop 895 feet of elevation gain. It is certainly quite the grind, especially since there's nothing but woods to look at the whole time. Also, I don't know if it's just the few hikes I chose in the White Mountains, but my god are these rocky. Like, even though we didn't walk too many miles in a given day, especially compared to my other trips, my feet were exhausted by the end of them. Now, once you do make it to the top of Mount Willard, it's pretty self-explanatory what it is you're looking at. That out in front of you is basically the whole of Crawford Notch, and it is absolutely insane. The scale of this was so overwhelming I couldn't believe it. And to top it all off, the road running through the middle was as satisfying as can be, and I actually got this really cool shot where I began zoomed into the vehicles and then zoomed out so you can get a sense of how enormous the view was. The only downside is this might have had the most disappointing fall foliage of the trip. I mean, it was still beautiful, don't get me wrong, and the trees in and around the valley aren't actually dead like they may appear, they're just brown leaves. But when I tell you I've seen how this place can look on a good year, it's probably life-changing. Nonetheless, I was still shocked by Mount Willard in so many ways. The payoff is so good, it might have been my favorite hike in the White Mountains.
Oh my gosh, Mount Willard is incredible. The hike is a little bit of a slog to get through. There's no scenery change on that, but when you get to the payoff, it is phenomenal. That is just enormous. It's like this massive canyon out in front of you. It's a shame, a little bit of brown, which you wouldn't expect so early into October, but nonetheless, loved it so much. Definitely my favorite single view of the trip so far.
Following Mount Willard, we drove a few miles south through Crawford Notch, which was actually really awesome for the different perspective, and this took us to the Frankenstein Cliff area, home to a number of different hikes. This includes Arethusa Falls, which might ring a bell if you're familiar with popular trails in the area. I'll talk a little bit about that later, but we had something else on our radar. Frankenstein Trestle is an 80-foot high, 500-foot long bridge scarcely used by trains these days, and it's safe enough to where you can actually walk up and down the tracks, including the trestle itself if you're really daring. You can get here one of two ways. The recommended approach is by navigating some of the Frankenstein Cliff Trail, or you can use the much less trafficked, unmaintained route that begins in the Arethusa Falls parking lot. This is what we did since it was the official All Trails route, but it's weird to me that they'd suggest this alternative when it's actually a pretty sketchy trail and ridiculously easy to get lost on. I had an offline map present at all times because I kept getting backtracked, and a lot of that is because when we were on the correct path, it was like super narrow, sometimes next to ledges with random crazy steep bits. Like, it just didn't make sense. I probably wouldn't do it again. but I did love the Frankenstein Trestle. I thought it was amazing. A lot of your best photo and video opportunities are at the far end of the bridge, so you definitely don't have to cross if you're afraid of heights, or worse, afraid a train might run you over. However, I decided to go about halfway, and it was exhilarating to say the least.
We made it to what is clearly a hidden gem spot because we haven't seen no one along the trail, but the Frankenstein Trestle Bridge is pretty freaking awesome. Are you serious? And it is really sketchy walking on this catwalk. Oh my gosh, it's like creaking.
One benefit you do get from walking across the Trestle Bridge is you're able to look up and see these rock formations that make up Frankenstein Cliff. I'm sure as I've mentioned the Frankenstein Cliff, y'all have been wondering what it is I'm talking about, so there you go. Pretty cool stuff. Looking out at the hills and mountains was preferred for me though, as it gives you an idea of how high and exposed you are. And this had some really nice fall color too, although the best of it was hiding in the shadows, so the shots I got only came out so well. Regardless, I love this place, and considering we were the only ones up here, I'd consider it one of, if not the most underrated spot we visited on the trip. And we realized while up here that we might have overcomplicated the process of reaching it, as we recalled a section of track at the parking lot, meaning in theory, you could walk along the train tracks to get to your vehicle. So that's exactly what we tried, and as it turns out, it is by far and away the easiest route you can take to and from the Frankenstein Trestle, alleviating the process by avoiding both trails that get you there.
So now that we've completed this hike, yeah, I would definitely suggest that you just walk along the railroad tracks. And by the way, right across the parking lot is Arethusa Falls Trail. That takes you to the highest waterfall in New Hampshire. Major bucket list, but it's not flowing very well. The waterfalls don't tend to flow well in the fall, so save that for next time. But definitely don't miss this because this was quite spectacular.
That concludes our time at Crawford Notch State Park and day 2 as a whole. We ended up spending the night in the town of Conway, which perfectly set us up for a ride along the Kancamagus Highway on day 3. Otherwise known as the Kank, this 32-mile stretch of road winding through the White Mountains is a designated National Scenic Byway, as it's considered one of America's most beautiful drives, particularly for fall colors. I knew there was a good chance it was going to be a headache to navigate this thing, as our only option to visit was a Saturday in the fall, but it ended up being fine for us, mainly because we went east to west. The more common route starts on the other side in the town of Lincoln, up in the mountains for some overlooks, ending in the low-lying sections of the highway at various roadside stops such as waterfalls. And I was kind of glad to experience it this way regardless, as saving the best for last seemed good to me. My suggestion, if you're using this video as a guide for the Kancamagus Highway and are intending to drive in from the west, just flip around the order of everything and you should be good to go. First for us was going to be the historic Albany-covered bridge, and like with many of the spots along the Kank, there were constantly people coming and going, making it feasible to find parking decently easy. Built in 1858, the Albany Bridge is 120 feet long and has a 6-ton load limit. It was by a long shot my favorite covered bridge we saw this trip, as its truss style was satisfying and it had the best views from the middle. Because the bridge crosses the Swift River, which runs alongside much of the Kank, you'll have the ability to overlook it and take in the serenity on offer. I'm a sucker for a good old historic building that interacts seamlessly within its environment, and the Albany covered bridge is no exception. Then, another mile up the road, you'll come across your first waterfall, Lower Falls. This was a little busier with it being a recreation site, but nothing crazy. A lot of the people who come here do so to chill out on the rocks for much of their day. And that's definitely the coolest attribute of Lower Falls, are all of the rocks which surround it. Swift River is already stunning as is, but the way the waterfall drops it by about 10 feet is incredibly satisfying. It's probably one of the widest waterfalls in New England, which make up for its lack of height. Not to mention, I loved rock hopping to get different shots of the falls, from its base, its side, there's even a distant observation platform too. It's not the waterfall that really makes it for me, it's the overall package and interactivity. I'd recommend Lower Falls for sure. And of course, if there's a Lower Falls, there's gotta be an Upper Falls, and to find it, you'll want to head 2 miles further to the Rocky Gorge Scenic area. For us, this was the busiest spot so far, but with patience we were able to find a parking spot with relative ease. This felt a lot like Lower Falls in that there were a lot of rocks and boulders on Swift River, people were just hanging out on them, but the big difference is that the gorge, which the scenic area gets its name from, though short, is really cool. The 2-tiered 15-foot plunge is similarly small, but again, it's not about the waterfall size, it's that interaction with the narrow gorge that excites me here. And best of all, you can cross a bridge over the river and look into the small canyon. That was pretty neat. Unfortunately, I failed to realize that if you continue beyond that point for just a little while longer, you end up at a big lake, and I'm sure that would have been pleasant, but I still liked Rocky Gorge a lot, and I'd put it in first place so far in my Kancamagus rankings.
So far, I'm absolutely loving the Kancamagus Highway. This place is really awesome. It's very busy, but we're doing a good job handling that. There's always opportunities here to get away from the people. It seems like you can get down to the waterfalls, you can rock hop, do all sorts of stuff. The covered bridge, Lower Falls, and Rocky Gorge are all awesome. I can't wait to continue.
Heading further up the highway, we passed right by the trailhead at Champney Falls, which I did consider doing, but I figured I'd be better off saving it for another trip to the White Mountains since it's a rather long hike I'd be doing in a season where the waterfall likely wouldn't be flowing well. Only reason there have been exceptions thus far on the Kank is because Lower Falls and the Rocky Gorge waterfall flow off of a river. We did have one more waterfall in store though, and that would be Sabaday Falls, which for whatever reason seems to maintain a solid flow rate much of the year. And I feel that it's a spot which could stand alone without a waterfall anyway because of how cool the location is, but before we get to that, I feel it's worth mentioning this may have been the most crowded spot on the Kancamagus Highway. I attribute that to the fall's easy accessibility, consistent flow rate, plus it is just really awesome. The hike is a little under a mile round trip and there's two different ways to view the falls. The lower vantage point is neat because you can see the lower tier of the waterfall make its way through a slot canyon, a lot like Rocky Gorge or even a smaller Flume Gorge. I also loved the vibrant green pool down at the bottom, it was surreal. From here you can make your way up a series of steps for some upper angles of the lower falls, and then that also reveals the upper tier for the first time. At 45 foot high, it's not the size of Sabaday Falls that stands out, but rather the intriguing shape where it kind of dips down at the top as if it's got a pre-drop. And 2, walking the full extent of the waterfall, I've once again got to emphasize the small but steep cliffs surrounding it. I thought they did a spectacular job with trail design during this section before looping you back around to the main path.
Especially on a trip where we've skipped so many waterfalls because they just aren't flowing the best, Sabaday Falls was so cool. It was definitely better than I anticipated. It's got a very satisfying shape. I love how you can walk all around it. Very, very busy with people, but that's okay. It was a dope spot.
Following the Sabaday Falls trailhead is where the Kancamagus Highway really starts to head uphill, so naturally a few miles deeper is where the overlooks begin to start. And for us, we kicked these off with a bang, as the Sugar Hill Scenic Vista might have been our favorite. Either that or it's a close second, because the mountains out in the distance have such bizarre shapes to them, it's really kinda awesome. There's 4 major viewpoints along this portion of the highway, and on the way to the next one, we noticed a pull-off for something called the Lily Pond. It's nothing special, but a scenic body of water nonetheless, and it was nice to get away from all the people here. We were one of only 2 cars parked up to see it, and there wasn't any hike whatsoever. I especially appreciated Lily Pond's serenity because from the next overlook onwards, it started to become a zoo here. The C.L. Graham Overlook is another great viewpoint with similar pros as the last one, though it felt a little blocked by trees and bushes in my opinion. Still cool though, and then pretty much just across the street was the Pemigewasset Overlook. This one complements the previous 2 really well because it faces the other direction and allows you to see some of the White Mountains you've yet to see up to that point. If not Sugar Hill, this absolutely could have been my favorite mountain view on the Kank. What stood out most was its foreground was stunning with so many types of flora and varying colors too. It also seemed like it may have had the largest mountains of any of the overlooks. Last, and I'll be honest, least impressive is Hancock Overlook. This is the first one of these you'll come up on if you're coming from the west, and to me it's in every way inferior to the rest. It had some nice scenery and color on display, but it's just way too blocked to stack up in my opinion. And the Kancamagus Highway also makes a tight U-shape at this point, so that combined with the traffic made this part of the drive feel pretty chaotic. You could tell it had started to become a little too busy to enjoy. I got this shot on the way out of all these cars backed up for what seems like forever. No joke, this went on for miles and miles. It's amazing to me that we managed to completely avoid it.
Absolutely loved all those overlooks. This was a great experience. Kancamagus Highway, totally worthy of the hype in my opinion. Just, if you're planning to get here on a busy day like we did, make sure you get here early because it's about 1:30 p.m. now and it's like swamped here. We're gonna continue, we have a few more spots to hit, and that'll be it.
The town of Lincoln marks the start of the Kancamagus Highway for those driving in on the west, and the end for folks like us. It seemed like a very pleasant town, but we passed right on through it because Highway 112 transitions to Lost River Road, and it's basically a continuation of the Kank that a lot less people know about. But in my opinion, everyone driving the Kancamagus Highway should absolutely devote some time to Beaver Pond, even if it's a little bit of a detour. This blew me away and it was so easy to access. There's no hike, no reservations, no crowds, you just park up and enjoy one of the most breathtaking pull-offs in the White Mountains. Beaver Pond isn't just massive, but it's surrounded on all sides by towering peaks with some of the most pristine fall foliage we'd seen. I'd also go as far as to say it was my favorite base lake view of the trip, topping Echo Lake Beach for me personally. To finally wrap up this video, we made one final stop at Lost River Gorge, a big sleeper hit in the White Mountains. Though it's recommended you reserve a visitation period online, dates and times don't sell out like these other places do. In my opinion, it seemed like everyone was meant to experience Lost River Gorge at their own leisurely pace, because what makes this unique from anywhere else I'd been in the east, and hell beyond, is this canyon is littered with boulder caves. Following the 500 or so steps to reach the thing, no I'm not kidding, I was a little disappointed by the beauty of Lost River Gorge. To me, it didn't feel like much of a canyon as opposed to a conglomerate of boulders, and definitely not a gorge because the water level seemed pretty low. And while I stand by those thoughts, there's 2 factors that massively compensate, which I didn't even begin to consider. First and foremost, the trail design is a blast as it maneuvers around and sometimes even through the large rocks. And 2, elaborating on that point further, there are endless optional passageways you can take through Talus Caves. There are signs out in front of each running over the difficulty, also featuring a description of what you can expect to see in them. What surprised me is nearly every cave at Lost River Gorge had something unique to offer. Some you had to crawl like a bear to fit through tight sections. Hell, some you had to quite literally get out on your stomach. Some had natural light, while others were almost pitch dark and required at minimum a phone flashlight to see what was going on. Many of the incorporated ladders was a blast. I absolutely love when places like this get creative with technical stuff like that. And some even featured a unique natural feature, like for example, one of my favorites had a cave waterfall in it. That was so cool. Speaking of which, there's also a named outdoor waterfall that everyone will see, which goes by the name of Paradise Falls. It's amazing to me that one could stay on the main trail the entire time and still have a great experience without factoring in just how much fun all of the spurs are. It didn't even occur to me that I'd just gone over roughly 500 steps by the time I reached the top. Time just flew by. And to top it off, the last stretch of the hike gives Lost River Gorge some nice variety as well, with expansive mountain views and a suspension bridge, because why not?
Lost River Gorge no doubt ended up being the biggest surprise from the trip. I'd never heard anything about it, just saw that we were driving by, so I figured why not. And this was absolutely awesome. The trail design is so cool. I climbed up so many ladders, squeezed through so many caves, definitely hit my head a couple times, but what an awesome time. And the White Mountains went better than I could have ever expected. With the exception of the fall colors being a little bit dull, every spot was absolutely fantastic. So I hope this video can help you guys out if you ever plan a trip to the White Mountain National Forest here in New Hampshire. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.